Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today for our Ask the Expert series. If you're new to our webinar series, welcome and thanks for being here. Criterion Edge runs multiple informative webinars throughout the year. Today, we will be doing a live Q&A on CER critical concepts, focusing on safety and performance objectives, acceptance criteria, clinical benefits, and risk-benefit analysis. We're proud to announce that Criterion Edge has been awarded Company of the Year among top regulatory services companies. So how can we help you? If you'd like to speak with us about your upcoming projects, medical or regulatory writing needs, we would be happy to book an appointment with you. You can email us for a free 30-minute consultation at consult@criterionedge.com. You can also book a meeting time directly with the link that we will send in the chat. Our presenter today is Lori Mitchell, founder and president of Criterion Edge, a global medical and regulatory writing firm serving the medical device, pharmaceutical, and biotech industries. Lori has over 20 years of experience in medical writing, safety and pharmacovigilance management, and regulatory reporting. Having provided regulatory and medical writing solutions to many pharma and medical device companies, both large and small, she is a proven leader in designing practical strategies to meet current global regulatory challenges. Lori is also a published author and holds a Master of Nursing from UCLA. And now I will welcome Lori to give an overview of our session today. Hi, Lori. How are you?
I'm great, Olivia. Thank you. And I hope you're doing well too. And thanks everyone for joining. Today is a continuation of a webinar that we had just last week. Was it, Olivia?
Yeah, last Wednesday.
Yeah. On this topic that we get a lot of questions about. So today we're going to continue to go through continued questions. We had so many in attendance last week and so many people asking questions. So we, of course, couldn't get to all of them, and we're not going to get to all of them today, unfortunately. We're going to do our best. So today we're going to continue to answer questions around the clarification of these concepts of risk, benefit, clinical outcomes, everything that's been listed on the title, and see if we can answer a few more of your specific questions. Safety and performance objectives, all of those. How to develop MDR-aligned safety and performance objectives. What are clinical outcomes and how do you leverage them, and how are they presented in a CER? And how are they different than S&P objectives? And then all of this together about analyzing it within the context of the clinical evaluation report. So that's a huge topic. We know that, and your questions are far-ranging. I will say that. So let's just get started. And again, I guess I want to do a disclaimer. Remember, I am not a regulatory affairs professional or expert. We are medical writers. We've written hundreds of CERs, 100 plus of MDR CERs alone. And we're beginning to do a lot of work in the IVD space. But we are not the experts. We are the experts within our own point of view from how we see this process. We're not regulatory affairs professionals. We don't sit in on meetings at the strategy meetings with our clients, at the manufacturer level, unless we're engaged in a project with them. So I can give you our practical, real world approach to this, what we have seen other clients do and handle, how we've handled things in CERs, how other clients have handled issues. And I hope that in that context, it's helpful. And these are my opinions and the opinions of our company. So again, I hope that you find this in the spirit in which it's given, which is a practical approach to what we see, not a definitive answer. Always, we can't always give definitive answers. We can just couch it in our own experience. So let's get started with that, Olivia, that little disclaimer.
All right, Lori, ready for our first question?
Yes.
All right, here's our first question from Daniela. Would you keep the CEP as part of the CER?
Well, the CEP and the CER are two separate, very separate documents. A plan is much different than a report. So if she means to keep them as a part, as then you would combine them into one document, that's probably a non-starter. They're very different documents and are reviewed differently by the notified body. But they are very much in tandem with each other. The CEP, when we're writing for our clients, we write the CEP and the CER in tandem with each other. Much of what is in the CEP obviously informs what is going into the CER. So statements made in the CEP have to be reflected in the CER. So while they are not the same document, they are certainly married documents. And the notified body will certainly jump back and forth between the two to check for alignment. And remember, the plan is a plan. There are no data. There is certainly no subject data in the clinical evaluation plan. So lacking data in the plan, a plan is a plan, a report is a report on data, essentially, and activities. So that's how I would answer that question.
All right, thanks. Here's our next question from Sue, and she's asking, does benefit risk analysis belong to the CER or risk management documentation? And is a quantitative benefit risk analysis compulsory?
Quantitative benefit risk analysis compulsory. So lots to unpack in those two questions. Does benefit risk analysis belong in the CER or belong to or as a part of the CER process, or should it come out of the risk management documentation? People who are writing the clinical evaluation report require your risk benefit analysis documentation. Risk benefit matrix, RAM, risk, whatever it is you do within your organization according to your own SOPs. Because that is part of your quality management system, and regardless of the needs of the CER, you are required by multiple other regulations, at least from under MDR, to have an ongoing process, living process of risk benefit assessment. As a part of that assessment, I would imagine there have to be some sort of analyses and conclusions along the way. Depending on the type of risk that you identify. So we certainly know about that. So that belongs to your risk management team. That's their responsibility. Now we come to the annual or biannual report on your clinical evaluation processes that you are ongoing and cyclic within your own organization. New data, new information, thus you do literature searches, and information that has been gleaned through your own internal processes, PMS reporting, and certainly risk-benefit analysis. And all that comes together into the story of the CER. This is the report on our ongoing clinical evaluation processes. And here are data, and here are our conclusions. As a part of that CER, the risk-benefit analysis section is, to us, I say this many times, it is the next to the last section of the CER, because it requires all of the previous work in the CER, the data, the state of the art, your conclusions throughout your data sections, and then you pull the identification of clinical benefits, and then you pull all that into your risk benefit analysis section, which in the CER is the first time you'll start talking about your risks. other than risks that you identified during your literature searches, new risks or additional risks. So now we're in the risk benefits analysis section, and you're pulling all of that together. And the question is it a quantitative benefit risk analysis? Is a quantitative benefit risk analysis compulsory? I can tell you in the questions that we received today, which were many, we probably received 20 questions on some version of the question of, is there such a thing as a benefit risk ratio, and is it calculated? Our answer is no. There is no such thing as a calculated benefit risk ratio. I know there was another question that said, well, our notified body is asking us for one. That's unfortunate, because honestly, if we were writing that CER, we wouldn't know how to do that because it's never been described. There's no mathematical formula that we are aware of that comes up with some sort of number. And nor is there in any of the regulations any kind of quantification of that number. So what is an acceptable number? If it is a number, what's acceptable? What is not acceptable? That's never spoken about, as far as we're aware, in any regulation. We've written over 100 MDR CERs, and I know I said this last time, and never, not one time, have we calculated any kind of a number for benefit risk. But do we analyze it? Absolutely. Is our analysis very methodical as you go through each benefit, each risk? How do they align with your safety and performance objectives? What are the clinical data that you've gathered in all the previous sections of the CER? The clinical data that support those benefits, and any clinical data that then speaks to any risks. So, and your risk management files that you're sending us should be looking at your ongoing risk assessment for these known risks. And if there are any unknown risks that have been identified, that then would need to go back into your risk management for analysis. So I'm getting kind of deep into this, and I know you probably have more questions about this, but the simple answer is in our experience, we have never calculated it, a benefit risk ratio. We have never actually seen a benefit risk ratio, nor have we gotten any pushback. Our clients have gotten any pushback on not establishing a ratio. So my only advice to those that may have a notified body that is asking for that is, if there is, I know that they don't consult, I understand that, but you might need to try to get some more information from them if they are actually looking for a ratio. Or you may say is that we don't calculate a ratio. Our analysis, which is very methodical and very robust, establishes the real question is, which is, does your device meet acceptability for your benefit risk profile? That's the question. So if your analysis answers that question, I'm not sure how a number would serve. So there might be room for a little pushback. That's a long answer, I know, but we get this question so much that I hope it helps.
All right, thanks, Lori. Moving on to our next question from Julie. When you have indirect clinical benefits for your device, how do you define safety and performance objectives?
When you have indirect clinical benefits, all righty. Yeah, delivery of a drug via a pen injector, and the pen injector is the device. And so, well, I would say one objective would certainly be, and I'm not really, we might debate whether or not it's really an indirect benefit, which would be, let's just say that this is for insulin. Let's just say that that's for what that's for. So the indirect benefit, and arguably a direct benefit, would be the successful injection delivery of the drug, in this case insulin, which could be then quantified or tracked by a reduction, obviously, in the blood sugar level. That's the logic there, certainly. So you would, another way of saying this is that this would be a surrogate safety, I would imagine, possibly performance objective, either a safety or a performance objective, which would be a surrogate. The one that we give most often, which is a indirect benefit of the guide wire. And if you guys, I know that some of you come to some of my webinars and you hear me use a lot of cardiac type of examples, but I'm just going to do it anyway, is that there is with regards to a guide wire that is being used in a cardiac procedure, stent thrombosis and placing a stent, whatever it is. So nobody talks about a guide wire. Nothing is written in the any kind of the published literature about it. But a surrogate endpoint, a direct benefit of that guide wire, which then can be translated to a safety and performance, say a performance objective, which would be an indirect performance objective, would be procedural success. So that is another way of saying, well, if the guide wire was inherent to the procedure and the procedure itself was successful, therefore the guide wire must have been successful. So that's a little bit of these surrogate endpoints. So in other words, if this is an injector for insulin, then the pin injector must have delivered the insulin, because the direct benefit or the direct result of that was a lowering of a quantifiable lowering of the blood sugar. So when you have indirect clinical benefits, how do you define S&P objectives? You define them by defining you define an objective, or you identify an objective. First of all, go back to your state-of-the-art section. Benefits, risks, putting your device, your pin injector, within the context of its competitors and the state-of-the-art of its technology. You should be able to define or identify the clinical benefits there, which then lead to clinical outcomes, which then could lead to safety and performance objectives. So I know that was convoluted. So be thinking about, I'll summarize. Look to your safety and look to your state-of-the-art section. Look for outcomes that show up in your state-of-the-art analysis of your landscape in which your technology exists. Out of that can come safety and performance objectives, whether they are direct or indirect, measuring something direct or indirect. They're still measuring something. And then you make an analysis or a justification why you're using an indirect measure. In other words, my example that I just gave of if the procedure was a success, the guide wire must have been a success. You have to spell that logic out and make that connection for the notified body and make that justification of why you're using that surrogate endpoint to measure an indirect benefit.
Okay, moving right along to our next question. This question is from Weedo. They would like to know, what is the general rule of thumb on what aspects to avoid putting in the CER? What would you say about this, Lori?
Oh my. Words that don't have a purpose. We find, and I know that's a kind of a short, silly answer, but what it means is probably more than any other thing, writers who have never written CERs before or haven't gotten feedback or not really trained in it. They don't know how to follow the story and the storyline. We see many CERs that are garbled because of that. You can't, we can't read it. The notified body can't read or make heads or tails of it. So everything should have a purpose in the CER. You should storyline out a CER, honestly, from beginning to end, because there are threads, and I say this all the time. Imagine it like a tapestry. You are weaving tapestries, and there are through lines from the beginning in the state-of-the-art section all the way through to your risk-benefit analysis. And those through lines can't be interrupted, and they can't be unclear. The notified body has to follow that storyline from beginning to end. So in a CER, more is not better. Clarity is better, not more. So I would say that's one thing, is don't throw everything in the kitchen sink at your CER and expect your notified body to untangle the story. So that would be one rule of thumb to avoid putting in the CER. Lots and lots of words, lots and lots of data, no storyline. Other things not to put, so anything that's unnecessary. I'm going to end my answer there. That's really what it is. If you have your CER from beginning to end, and you know what it is that you need to put in it, you have a strong pressure tested by the notified body template, and you use discipline to pull through those storylines, thoroughly explain as you go through without spending too much time and too much energy on things that are not important. And we could have a whole webinar about things that are not important in a CER, but folks throw in anyway. But I would say in general, that has to do with too much explanation, too much information that is irrelevant. And that's a learned skill. You're going to learn that over time, the more CERs you write, what flies with the notified body and what doesn't. So that's the kind of rule of thumb, what aspects to avoid putting into the CER. Another one, I'll just say really quickly, depends on your own SOPs within your own organization. Be thinking about what you can pull into appendices. You do not need to bloat up the body of the CER with information that can be referred to in an appendix. That's just background information or side information that the reader can refer to it. That's another thing. So don't throw everything into the CER. It's a story, and always remember that it's a story. And the notified bodies are, and this is a joke I always make at their expense, they're tired, they're cranky, they're hungry, they're sleepy, they're distracted. They sit down and they want to read a CER from beginning to end that makes sense, that they don't have to part through the weeds to find the real information. So keep that in mind as you're writing your CER.
All right, I think that was some great advice. Our next question is from Catherine. She is asking, do you consider literature review as a proactive or reactive activity as part of the PMCF plan?
Excuse me. Well, both, and then I'll say why. One is because a plan is a plan, so there's no data in it. So if you're talking about doing a systematic literature review to collect any kind of data on your subject device, obviously not, because this is a plan. However, a plan has to have some underpinning to it. It's like, what do you need? What is it a plan for? What is it that you need? How do you get that? And how do you get that? So if you need to do a systematic literature review on your device, like a look back, to try to help you set your safety and performance objectives. That would certainly go into certainly the CER, the CEP, but would also populate into your PMCF plan. Then certainly you can use a systematic literature review for that. But if the question is about, do I need to do systematic literature reviews to do a PMCF plan? Do you need to? Are you required to? No. Will you need to in order to gather more information about what kind of a PMCF activities you want to plan for? Then do it. A systematic literature review is a great way to get competitor information, what's happening, best practices, new guidelines. Systematic literature reviews are great informational tools. So by all means, do it. But does a PMCF plan necessarily require it? No. So I hope that gives you some ideas and helps with answering the question.
Okay, thanks, Lori. Here's our next question from Bin San. What is the usual project time budget for completing a CER?
Calendar days for us, we give webinars about this. For active writing, 3 months. 4 is better. So that's calendar days. That's different than how much time does it take a person or people usually to write a CER. And that I'm going to cop out of that question because it's very, very, very dependent on the CER, what we're writing about, the device under evaluation. How many indications does it have? How many competitors does it have? How many patient populations? And what is its intended use? Because this all informs data. It certainly informs the state of the art. So the state of the arts can become 50, 60, 70, 80 pages long if you have to go through because you do have to go through every indication for that device. So if that device, for example, is an ICD device or a pacer in ICD, and it has 6 different indications for the type of rhythm that it may interact with, 6 different rhythms, that's 6 different sections of this SOA that you have to talk about. So these can get very big, these CERs, depending on some of those factors. If they're very straightforward, data is scant, might be a different story. Takes less time.
Okay, we have about 15 minutes left, so we'll keep running through as many questions as we can. Moving on to our next question. Are notified bodies getting more consistent or less variable in terms of the details that they deem acceptable in a CER?
I could have sworn we answered a question like this last week. So apologies to those of you that were here last week and are here seeing, didn't we ask that question or answer that question last time? But I'll answer it again really quickly. So you might ask, as a regulatory writing company, how is it that we even see the notified body responses? Well, we do in many of our clients, most maybe, that if it's a CER that we wrote for them, and there are regulatory responses that come back that the manufacturer needs help with, because we know there are always notified body questions that come back. So if there are questions that come back that the manufacturer, our client, is asking us to help with, so we see those responses quite a bit. So are they getting more consistent, less variable in terms of the details that they deem acceptable in a CER? I think they're getting more. I think the notified bodies have. Well, it depends on the notified body. I will couch it in that. The top notified bodies are getting more of their own internal clarity, in my opinion. They have more internal clarity about what they're looking for, and they are, I think, picking their battles. And a battle that was, battles that were being waged in 2021 or early 22 are maybe becoming less important, or the CERs are becoming better at answering those questions. So the notified bodies are turning their attention to other low-hanging fruit that they need to get all of the manufacturers on board with. So I don't know if it's so much as consistent or inconsistent as it is evolving. That's how I would say that it's more evolving. Now, between notified bodies, TUV sued versus BSI versus somebody, all over, I think there can be inconsistencies, but the notified bodies, remember, the reviewers are human. So this is a human endeavor. And the notified bodies as a company can only lay down so many, qualifications and SOPs for their own people to follow. And I know that we're all at the mercy of a notified body reviewer that does a very good job, and those that may be less experienced, let's put it that way, and are asking questions that may be difficult to answer. So I see also that the notified body, I've seen some reviewer qualifications for the notified bodies to be, I think, surprisingly thin a couple of times. And I think, oh, they're having bandwidth issues, and they're kind of digging into folks that 2 years ago may not have qualified to have been hired at a notified body. That's my own opinion. I mean, that's all I've got to say about that.
Okay. So here's our next question, and it's sort of two questions that came through the chat that I thought were sort of similar. The first one, which function should be doing the overall benefit risk analysis and using what data exactly? And the second question, what is the most important connection between CER and risk evaluation team?
Oh. So we sort of answered the first one earlier. What function within the company, I'm guessing, should be responsible for the overall benefit risk analysis? So let's take that first part. The overall benefit risk analysis that's going into the CER, the writer, and whoever the people are on the clinical and risk benefit teams that are supporting that writer, and making sure that the writer has the messaging correct. So if it's doing the overall the benefit risk analysis in the CER, the writer and the cross-functional team, which I would imagine would certainly include the risk benefit team, they are responsible for it because they have to sign off at the end of the day on what's in the CER. And the same thing is true for if we're talking about ongoing benefit risk activities within the company, who's responsible for that? Obviously, the benefit risk folks are. Not really sure what we mean by using what data exactly, because now I'm not a benefit risk analysis expert. I don't work for companies and do those benefit risks. We certainly see the RAMs, the matrices, everything that they send us all the time. And it seems to be that often it's not so much about as much about data as it is about the analysis of outcomes, which are risk benefits. So you analyze those using any available data to justify whether that's a new risk, a clearly identified benefit that has clinical data to support it. So again, to support any benefit, or you have to have clinical data to support that benefit. And benefits come from are born in the state-of-the-art analysis. For risks, also born, but not really in the state of the art. They're more born in the assessment of the device's own data. That's in the big clinical data sections of the middle, basically in the middle of the CER, published literature, clinical investigations, PMCF data, that type of thing. That's where risks can be involved. And then when you go out to the risk benefit section, you pull all of that forward and methodically, one by one, go through that in the CER to analyze each benefit and each risk for acceptability. So I hope that answered that first question. Most important connection between the CER and the risk evaluation team, the most important connection, certainly the risk evaluation team within the company is critical to make the final argument. Remember, if you've ever heard me before say, the final argument for benefit risk acceptability, safety and performance as intended, lands in the risk benefit section of the CER. That's where it lives. That's where it's formed, analyzed, justified, and concluded on. So the risk evaluation team, because you're as a writer are now in the risk benefit section, you need everything very clearly spelled out from them, so that the CER is a report on their activities. The CER is not meant to replace internal risk benefit activities. It's meant to report on them and to weave them into the analysis of the clinical evaluation report. So the association between the two is what I sort of said at the beginning of our call, which was you have to have all of your, a writer has to have all of their documents ready. And the IFU is the most important, and right behind it is the risk benefit analyses that come out of ongoing risk benefit activities within the company.
Okay, thanks, Lori. I think we have time for a couple more questions. This next one was sent in by Annalisa, and she says, while performance objectives are easier to develop, safety ones are more challenging. What is the recommended approach for the latter?
Well, there might be people on this call listening and saying, I don't find performance objectives to be easy, but while it's true that, because sometimes when you have, especially some devices like we were talking about earlier, and you know, I was saying the injector pin, and I assumed it was for insulin, and you know, the reduction, you can have debates about whether or not a particular objective that you come up with really underpins safety, or does it support performance? And so having said that as a disclaimer, what is the recommended approach for developing the challenging safety and performance objectives? Safety and performance objectives, if you recall, if you came to last week's meeting, we talked about, I said earlier too today, that clinical benefits are basically born in the state-of-the-art analysis, landscape analysis. You begin to make statements such as, and I gave these examples last week. For example, a clinical benefit statement comes straight from the state-of-the-art. PCI with new generation drug-eluting stents and CABG, which is open heart surgery, is associated with better survival than medical therapy alone. That's a benefit statement. Comes out born out of the state-of-the-art analysis. Well, what do you do with that statement? That's a benefit statement. You create a clinical outcome for it. Follow the map now. Okay, well, what's a clinical outcome that would support that benefit? And the example I think I gave last week, well, that could be outcomes such as rate of death or cardiac death, or maybe rate of myocardial infarction or stent thrombosis, things like that. Those are outcomes. Now we're getting close to doing something measurable that, again, related to that benefit. PCI is associated with better survival than medical therapy alone. Okay, better survival. So we measure survival, death. Let's just say death, obviously. So now you move cardiac death over to what is the specific safety and performance objective that you're going to write in your CER. And maybe it's going to be rate of cardiac death at 30 days, or peri-procedural within 24 hours, survivability, whatever it is. Now you've got a quantifiable, measurable, searchable outcome to establish your acceptance criteria for, which is the last leg of that stool. You've now got a safety and you've got to, let's just say that that's a safety objective, and you have to justify why it's a safety objective. Survivability, it should be a fairly easy justification that would be that that's a safety objective. You've said rate of cardiac death at 30 days, which I actually don't think is a very good date because it's too far out from the procedure, but let's just go with me here. And now you go back and you go into your competitor literature where you are identifying your acceptance criteria, your competitor literature identified as part of the state of the art. And then you pull from your competitor lists of included articles from your competitors, what is their rate of cardiac death at 30 days? And that's how you build your acceptance criteria. So it started with a lowly outcome benefit statement in an SOA, all the way through to a safety and performance objective. That's the span of how you get from one place and link it to another place. And that's why I say there are through lines within the CER everywhere, and that's one of them.
All right. Do we have time for one more question, Lori?
One
All
more.
right. This next question was sent in by Harley. How do we tell the story of a device with less than ideal safety and performance data?
Well, Harley, you got to be honest. First of all, honesty is the best policy. The notified body, and I say that flippantly, but I mean it. We look at a lot of like less experienced medical device companies or less experienced writers for CERs, and there's a lot of talk sometimes that tends to be hiding obvious truth, which is, and data sufficiency is usually one of them, or data sufficiency, or that the device actually really doesn't meet safety and performance objectives, or it doesn't measure up. But there tends to be a lot of noise around that, like sort of look over here while we talk about something else and try to distract you from an obvious problem. So while we do not recommend that you put a red flag on it, you have to talk about things openly, acknowledge the truth, and then create a plan. Now, let's talk about data sufficiency for just a minute, and that will be the last. We'll keep you over a few minutes. Just talk about data sufficiency. Data sufficiency is a big issue amongst a lot of our clients. Many questions. I'm glad you asked it because there are many other questions about data sufficiency that we get all the time. And how do you handle that? And one of the justifications that you can put in your CER with some risk involved in it, that the notified body may not buy it or push back on it, they may push back, would be that you acknowledge that very specifically what the shortcomings are from your data. In other words, you don't make broad global statements. You just say, for this safety objective or for that performance objective, there is a lack of clinical data. And you don't even really say a lack of clinical data. You find the clinical data, you analyze what you've got, and then there's justifications about PMCF activities that are aimed specifically at filling those gaps. we have used that justification before, usually successfully, but not always, because it is a plan. And you would really have to put that in your plan, not in your report, because that's a forward-looking planning statement. So it goes in your plan. But if you want to create, PMCF activities that specifically fill those data gaps, you should talk about that in the plan, reference it in the CER, and see what happens. That's one example that I can give you about that is like, not identify it, but don't try to hide the obvious, and try the justification of, but we've got a plan for that justification, which is essentially what it is. And here is the plan. Restate it in the CER. Talk all about it in your PMCF plan. Talk about even what you might expect to get as part of that PMCF, those PMCF data gathering activities in your plan. So those are ways to do that. And then it's a little bit of good luck after that, because there's no writer, not us, not anybody can write away insufficient data or imperfect data. We can only acknowledge it and try to mitigate it as best as possible.
Okay.
Everybody, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Olivia. Thanks so much for attending today. There's a lot of talk. I know that you have more questions. You heard me say things that you probably said, yes, but, and you want to ask more, or you want to disagree or talk about it more. I think Olivia's going to say, feel free to reach out and set a free consultation. If you have specific questions you want to hash through with me on a 30-minute call, I'm happy to do that as time allows. So go ahead, Olivia, I'm stealing your thunder.
Yep, definitely. If you want to talk more, if you have more questions for us, go ahead and click that link in the chat and you can book an appointment. We have time set aside, especially for everyone who attended today. So if you are looking for more guidance, want answers to more questions, go ahead and book some time with us. I know we still have many questions in the queue. I know we didn't get to all your questions today. If you're looking for more information on this topic, Lori did have a webinar last week. If you want to watch that, you can also click the link in the chat and get some more information. Thank you again, Lori, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Take care, and I hope to see you at our next webinar. Have a great day.